there's our region there in the western half of North America, and here is what we wish. That drop is a schematic representation of the 3% of the planet's water which is freshwater or sweet water. That's the topic, the part of the whole water picture that concerns us here. And if we had our druthers, wouldn't we like to have that 3% deposited right here in our region in this drought year? This is the man in the 19th century who first alerted his fellow citizens and all of us who've come thereafter about the importance of water in this region. And the man on the right is John Wesley Powell. The greatest and best biography of him is by Stanford's own Wallace Stegner. It's called Beyond the 100th Meridian is the title of the biography, and we'll come back to the 100th Meridian in just a moment. And John Wesley Powell is famous for many things. He was the first person to navigate the entire length of the Colorado River. And even though he only had 1.5 upper limbs, if you can see him here, his right arm was blown off below the elbow at the Battle of Shiloh. He was quite a skilled rock climber and had a grand time going down through the Grand Canyon and climbing all the canyon walls. That's not why he's important for us here this afternoon, but because of a United States Geological Survey document that he authored in 1879, the title of which gives us the leitmotif and the central concept that we're dealing with here. The title of that report was simply A Report on the Lands of the Arid Region of the United States. And the operative word is arid. And John Wesley Powell, this is what he knew. If you look at that fabled 100th meridian line there, right down the center of the continent, on the west or sunset side, the left as you're looking at it, you'll see by the shading there, if you can read the legend, that is the part of the United States where, by and large, with a few exceptions in high mountain ranges, the coastal range, Sierra Nevada, Rockies, the average annual rainfall is less than 20 inches a year. Which is the meteorologist's definition of aridity. So this is what Powell knew, graphically represented, and this is Powell's solution, or part of his solution, I might say, that he recommended in that Geological Survey document from 1879. He said the perpetual management of scarce water in the American West was going to be such an urgent need that political jurisdictions, that is state lines in the West, should be organized along hydrological boundaries. State lines should conform to watershed boundaries, and this is the map of the western United States that he advocated. We all laugh at it because we know it doesn't look anything like that, it looks like this. And when we're in the West, we're in the presence, as you can see at a glance, of the famous square states, and the very geometrical, tidy rectangularity of state boundaries in the West is a reminder of how badly John Wesley Powell's advice was rejected. And our forebears in this region were determined to, we might take this as a poetic statement of their determination to impose human dominion on this region come hell or low water. The other thing to notice about this map is those red state maps inside the conventional state boundary lines. They represent the percentage of land in every state that is owned down to this day by the federal government. And again, at a glance, you can see there is a tremendous difference between the eastern and western halves of the continent. The West is the place where the federal government remains, to this day, a very significant landlord. 44% of California, for example, is federally owned, mostly by the Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service, the two big ones. And what have the feds done with their power over this region? The principal investment that the federal government has made in this region, beginning soon after the passage of the so-called Reclamation Act in 1902, was building dams. And this is a highly redacted map of major dam projects in the United States. And again, at a glance, you can see the two regions that have a lot of federal dams are the Tennessee Valley Authority, a New Deal program, and of course the American West. And this is probably the single most iconic dam of all the great western dams, Hoover Dam on the Colorado River. And I want you to hold in your mind's eye just for a moment the so-called bathtub ring, that little cuticle white rim around the edge of Lake Mead, which is the result of silt that's come down the river, deposited on the canyon walls, and when water is drawn down, the silt remains, and you get that little cuticle bathtub ring. Just hold that picture in your mind's eye, please. The program, we would use the name today, or the term nation building today, to describe what happened in the American West at mostly federal initiative. beginning, as I say, after the passage of the Reclamation Act in 1902. First major federal dam is on the Salt River in Arizona, outside of Phoenix. And the last major dam project in the United States, Western United States, was Glen Canyon on the Colorado, built in the 1960s. So in that roughly 60, 70-year period, every major river in the American West was dammed, and that is what has made this region habitable and economically prosperous to the degree that it is. And this very schematic map is simply an illustration of that. Those little red triangles represent something called the population center of gravity in each decennial census. And you can see there between 1790 and the first census in 1880, that's the classic westward movement. And then you see it stops, and those triangles hardly move across the relatively narrow state of Indiana for a period of 60 years, between 1880 and 1940. And then the westward movement resumes again in our time after World War II, and it dips south as well as west. And there's a lot of history embodied in that little schematic map, but its principal driver is the irrigation of the West thanks to these federal initiatives. This has had economic consequences. The West has been, ever since World War II, the most economically dynamic region, accounts for a third of GDP. 1 out of every 3 Americans now lives in the 17 western states. 1 out of every 5 lives in either Texas or California. 1 out of every 8 lives in California. And this has had political consequences, again, schematically or figuratively captured here. This is Ronald Reagan's inauguration. You see him down there at the bottom of the photo. Why is this significant? This is 1981, Reagan's first inaugural. He was the first president ever whose inauguration took place on the western facade of the Capitol. From Thomas Jefferson through Jimmy Carter, every president was inaugurated on the eastern facade of the Capitol. Reagan said, nothing doing, the West is the future, I'm a man of the West, I want to be facing West. And every inaugural since then has happened on the western facade of the Capitol. So it's just a way to capture the political dimensions of this as well. I don't need to remind anybody in this room about the drought. Whether Congress created the Dust Bowl is a matter of controversy, but let me just briefly highlight some of the things that have driven us to the point of crisis where we now are, and about which my colleagues will speak. One, we have succeeded beyond the dreams of the people who built the specifications for the regional plumbing system that we have. I just gave you the numbers about how many people live in the West who were overburdening the system as it was originally designed. Secondly, as this little critter here, the Delta Smelt, reminds us, we have, in the lifetime of most people in this room, changed our scientific perspectives on the fragility of ecosystems and the claims of other species besides humans on this scarce resource of water. And we have, in essence, empowered critters like this to come into court and ask for their fair share of the resource. When Judge Oliver Wanger in Fresno handed down his decision a few years ago to protect the Delta Smelt, it essentially shut down the pumps down there at Tracy, and that's the regime we've been living with for the last several years. This is simply a reminder that Mother Nature herself imposes limits on this great ambitious project. This is a place down in the southern San Joaquin Valley where there has been excess pumping of groundwater out of a subsurface aquifer, and the aquifer has collapsed upon itself, and of course that means at the surface there's been tremendous subsidence. That 1925 sign up the utility pole is where the surface of the earth was in 1925. Then you'll see 1955, and down the ground where the man is standing, 1977. Okay, climate change. I won't belabor this topic since we know a lot about it. There's less water in the snowpack, there's less snowpack, and what there is runs off earlier than it used to. And we have more and larger wildfires as a kind of corollary of all these other troubles. So I asked you to keep Lake Mead in mind a moment ago. This is what Lake Mead looks like today. That bathtub ring is now 30 or 40 or maybe 50 or 60 feet in depth. And the best studies we have of this tell us that Lake Mead will never, ever, ever recharge to its levels of as recently as about 10 years ago. So I'll leave you with some of these depressing images, and here's a way to sum up everything I've just talked about. I got this slide from my colleague David Freiberg. This is a reminder, I think the original caption was something like a Western pastime, a friendly conversation about water. It's an old story, we understand this. It goes back to Mark Twain's famous dictum that in the West, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over. And thanks to the wonders of Photoshop, just a reminder that we've introduced other species into this equation, and if that weren't enough, we have climate change as well.